you can never be an athlete again. You must stop rowing. You must stop everything. You likely can never have children. And you should consider the fact that you will probably die young.
ARVC has shaped my life in many ways, but it also has shaped the lives of my family. Today's guest is not just part of this story, she is part of my story, my sister Meredith Cartwright. I was diagnosed with ARVC in 1991, and nearly 25 years later, Meredith was suddenly diagnosed too. It is a heart condition that took our grandmother's life and continues to run throughout our family. Meredith is a Canadian lawyer, investor, and activist with advanced degrees from Queen's University and Harvard. Her activism is in the areas of human rights, water management policy, and promoting interfaith dialogue. Like me, she's a big supporter of cardiac research into the causes of ARVC. I am so proud of Meredith for showing her full range of emotions on this difficult topic. In this revealing episode, we share our reactions to each other's diagnosis, talk about the family tensions over genetic testing, and offer our hope for gene therapy to stop the progression of this deadly disease. Hi, Mara, and welcome to my studio.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you. It's a lovely studio and better lighting than I have at home.
It is actually my home, and Meredith came over from her house. Meredith is my older sister by 5 years, and we are going to tell our stories. This is a different setup for me. Usually I'm interviewing people online, but here we are together. So our community is really made up of families. And so today's episode, we're going to talk about our own experiences, and we have different experiences, but they really relate to a lot of people in our community. So I thought it would be interesting if you actually tell my story, what you remember about it, and your reaction.
Well, really, thank you for having me, and really thank you for doing this work. It's important, and it's difficult to talk about a bit, but I really appreciate being able to tell your story. So I'm 5 years older than Heather. I was at law school at Queen's, and Heather was at Western. And Heather was, and arguably still is, an amazing athlete, but no longer so, obviously, in terms of her heart. So she was on the varsity boat at Western. If you know anything about Canadian university rowing, that perhaps other than or with UVic was the leading boat forever in Canadian rowing, and had in it future Olympians, which is where Heather was likely going to before the head of the Trent Regatta, where I wasn't there. I got a phone call from my mom, and my sister had literally collapsed in the boat at the end of a head race. A head race is a very long race, and with, I think, the quick thinking of a St. John's ambulance young man, was put into an ambulance and sent to Peterborough at one of the regional hospitals in the Peterborough region. By the time I got there, my sister, again, who was, I think you were 21 at the time, like a beautiful athlete, an amazing athlete, like accomplished in so many sports and incredibly fit, was on in a hospital bed, literally hooked up to everything. And I was told that to bring her heart rate down, which by the time I got there was in the 300s, that they had literally had to put a needle into her heart to try and stabilize her heart, to bring her heart rate down. Now, I was totally new to this. I didn't understand what was going on. So within a couple of weeks, months, we then found ourselves in London, Ontario, where Heather was at university, with a leading cardiologist and specialist. And the idea was that an ablation would fix this. So my mother and I were there. It was spring, and Dr. Klein was there. And, we were with Dr. Klein. He explained that Heather would be going in the operating room. It should take some time, an ablation to be done, and that this would fix the problem. So Heather was wheeled out, and well within the hour, Heather was wheeled back in. And Dr. Klein sat beside my sister's bed. My mother was there. And Dr. Klein turned to my sister and said, "You can never be an athlete again. You must stop rowing. You must stop everything. You likely can never have children. And you should consider the fact that you will probably die young." It was brutal. My sister was 21. She's a beautiful young athlete. And it was like watching just a gate or a door just coming down. I just, like, literally my heart broke for my sister. I've seen bad news being delivered, and bad news is bad news. And but this really was god awful for her. I just, and we're sisters, so every time, we go through life and we fight like every family does. And when things are difficult with my sister, I go back to that moment because I just can't imagine being 21 and being told these things. And her life from that point was forever changed. And and here's the thing about Heather is she is fiercely resilient. So she'll lick her wounds a bit, but then there's always a pivot and a movement into something else. So I mean, gosh, it wasn't long after this like devastating, brutal, like life-changing diagnosis when she's at university comes through that Heather reaches out with Al Morrow, her mentor, who was the varsity women's coach at Western and gold medal winning Olympic coach. And he mentored Heather to be a rowing coach. And so there she was at university, like getting a crew and like throwing herself in and becoming a rowing coach, and which is unbelievably like resilient. And so Heather goes off. She goes to film school, and then she moves into multimedia. She sort of put the coaching aside. She was still very involved in rowing, and had a business career. We worked together. We had an entrepreneurial venture that didn't work out, but we had a good try, and we were ahead of our time. It really could have been great, but nevertheless, Heather then pivoted back to rowing. So her next big job was at Princeton under the mentorship of Mike Tatey, who was the men's Olympic rowing coach and a gold medal coach. And then from Princeton, Heather then had crews at Boston University, and then ended up with the women's lightweight crew at Harvard. And Harvard, when you look at my sister, you look at some of the media, like Harvard's fantastic, the Weld Boathouse on the Charles River. I mean, Heather was, and literally she had these incredible lightweight rowers. She's got connections all across Canada with, women who are on the national team. Her friend Marnie McBean at this point has run multiple medals. And Heather's committing herself to be a coach, and she has a calling. Like Heather has a calling. She has a vocation. She is, not everybody in life gets to do something they're really good at and passionate about and excellent at. And Heather had this. And, I know lots of professionals and lots of people who never have this level of excellence and calling to do it. So as Heather is like in this dream job and, working intently with these great athletes and she starts having episodes. And at this point I'd had my daughter, and there'd been numerous episodes. My mother and I had gone down to, and, Massachusetts General and just talking to the camera, all of these really our condition, ARVC, there are a number of leading practitioners and clinicians. The best are here in Toronto, I would argue, but we got to meet them, at Massachusetts General and Johns Hopkins. So my next sort of really potent memory is I had my daughter who was 8 years old. I think it was the NCAA championships, or was it the sprints?
Yeah.
So this is like an amazing rowing race. All the top crews are there, and it's in New Jersey. And it's not a head race, so it's like, what, 1,000 meters?
No, it's 2,000.
2,000 meters. And so here Heather's got this amazing crew. I've got my 8-year-old daughter. My sister is so incapacitated with her heart condition. And this is kind of a testament to how good she was, that Harvard allowed her not to go where coaches go, which is the end of a rowing race. My sister had to sit away from the rowing, from the river, and sit beside an ambulance, because if my sister, with adrenaline and cortisol spiking, went into tachycardia, she was beside an ambulance. And I saw, that's another point, I watched her sit there in the sun and, beside the ambulance, and she was still at it, and Harvard was still supporting her. And I'm like, that's pretty remarkable. Then the next sort of segue in this story is, after numerous attacks, she, I wasn't there. She was at, again, the Weld Boathouse, and she'd come in from a practice, and she went into multiple storms of tachycardia. And it was so out of control that did they have to put the needle in you at the boathouse, or do you even remember? So again, and then she was moved to Auburn Hospital, right? Because they couldn't even get her to Massachusetts General. They couldn't get her to the main hospital. She had to be in a sort of a tertiary hospital because she was so unstable. And that was the end of her rowing career as a coach. And again, there's just this wall coming down on a vocation, on excellence, on a passion. It's just brutally unfair, and to be cut off like that. And it's brutal. So Heather picks herself up, comes back to Toronto, reestablishes herself, and again licks her wounds a bit, but then sort of embarks on this an incredible commitment to philanthropy, to working through Western to support coaching at Western, leads the charge within our family on genetic testing through Dr. Dana Spears, UHN, and sort of nudges me to do my bit at UHN and contribute to sick kids, because this is a genetic disease. And so, I'm really proud of you. I really am proud of you. You have really, been kicked in the teeth on numerous times, really beaten up by this, and managed to kind of pull yourself together and come back.
Wow. Well, thanks for telling my story. These diseases have a lot of impact on families, and I don't underestimate how it affected you and Brian, our brother, and Mom. It's a scary thing, and a lot of families, unfortunately, the person doesn't survive. So we have to acknowledge that I was very lucky to have good care all the way through, and immediate care when the first incident happened.
Oh wait, Tim, I just want to tell one more incident. So Heather had several storms, but one of the most memorable ones.
So a storm, just to clarify, is when your defibrillator goes off multiple times, and in succession. And it, yeah, you really are in an emergency situation.
I think this is relevant because we're going to get to my story. And so we were with Heather one day, and this is like I think I was in my early 30s. You might not have crusted over into, but you'd been living with this for some time. It's a hot day. We're at the cottage. We're moving around. And Heather had her defibrillator fired 12 times. We were like, well, we can get to my part where I'm like, no, these are life-saving devices. I remind myself that all the time. But I really don't want my defibrillator to fire, because I've seen it. Look, these things saved Heather's life. They save people's lives. But to watch somebody get defibrillated, for 12 different times. So she ended up in the South Muskoka Hospital, and then was orange airlifted down to St. Mike's and then stabilized there. But, this is kind of like to survive means to survive like this, right? Like you have to be prepared. Like, this is what this means. And again, it was really, I can't believe anybody could handle all that. And I know once you were like, again, you're in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and you got shocked like on the riverbank by yourself. This is so Heather really has experience like living with this thing, and the pluses and the minuses. Having said that, again, these things save lives. We're glad to have them. We're grateful to be in a health system where we have them. So
yeah. Well, let me tell your story. So, my mom, like when I came back from Boston, which I had to leave my job, sadly, a couple of years back, our mother was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. So one of the silver linings, I guess, is I'm here to take care of her, and she passed away. And you and I and Brian's new baby, who is literally a babe in arms. We were at our accountant's office because we were going through mom's estate, and we had to, go do a lot of paperwork, as one does after someone dies. And we were having this meeting, and I looked across the table, and you were so flushed, like it could have been a hot flash, right? You were just sweating. But you were very pale, and you looked very agitated. I was actually holding Brian's baby in my arms, and I looked across you and I said, "Are you okay?" And you're like, "No, I don't feel good." And I'm like, I think you're having a heart issue right now." And you were like, "No, probably not." But the room was like kind of really concerned at how you looked. And then I just decided to call it. And I turned to our accountant and I said, "Call 911, get an ambulance. Meredith has to go to the hospital. She has to go to Toronto General Hospital." I actually texted my cardiologist and said, "Meredith's on her way."
It was the closest hospital.
It was the closest hospital, thank God. And and as I recall, you were admitted, but I think they were thinking maybe it was a heart attack, but we were trying to convey it to them. It could be an arrhythmia because this is in our family. Eventually you were diagnosed with the same inherited heart condition I have called ARVC, but you were diagnosed on a clinical diagnosis.
Can I just jump in here very quickly? So previous to this, I had gone to St. Mike's 3 times with what I thought was at the time originally thought it was a heart attack. They did the test, wasn't a heart attack. Went back 2 times, and they're like, "Oh, this is a panic attack," and they popped me an Ativan. Fine, nothing wrong with what they did, but I just thought what I was having at the accountant's that day was a panic attack.
Yeah,
I was stressed about other issues, and I was like, "Oh, okay, this isn't." And I didn't want to go out in an ambulance. In fact, I wanted them to put the ambulance. But once I got there, they tested for whatever the proteins that come out in a heart attack. They're like, "No heart attack." They're like, "You are staying here for more testing." So I literally stayed and did a stress test the next day in my loafers and jeans. And while I was in the stress test, they basically pushed me off and said, "Look." And then by like maybe 2, they kept me. And then they're like, I had tested for the genes. And there's only 9 known genes at the time, and then I'll let you tell my story.
Yeah. So I think that's what you experience with St. Mike's, and the misdiagnosis is fairly common, especially for women. You come in and you probably are, a woman might be having a heart attack. They assume it's a panic attack.
Well, at first thought it was a heart attack. The next 2 times they said panic.
Okay. So, that's kind of common, but as we know in the SAS community, there are warning signs: fainting, rapid heart rate, flush, startling, and
they feel exactly like an anxiety attack or sometimes a bad menopause.
Yeah. So those are hard to diagnose. But excuse me, but because of my condition, and then you got into Toronto General with my doctors, they looked deeper, and that's when they discovered it. But we have this interesting thing between us. So because at the time the panels detected with genetic testing that I have the mutation of PKP2, which is pretty common for ARVC. But when you got genetically tested,
which was a year before I'm at Toronto General. So a year before I had been genetically tested for the 9 known genes, and both my daughter and I have been tested. Neither of us were seen to have the genes. Yeah. We thought both she and I were in the clear.
Yeah, you thought you were in the clear, but it turns out you're gene elusive. So it means that the panel is not yet quite big enough to capture all the genes that they think might contribute to ARVC. There's a working theory with our shared electrophysiologist, Dana Spears, is that I may have a double dose. Like I may have 2 gene mutations, one of which I share with you. So we come at this and sort of, I think this is a very common experience in families, or in family groups. There might be whole family groups that are all gene elusive, but they have the clinical diagnosis of ARVC. There might be other family groups that have one of the known gene mutations. So this is sort of an interesting thing to catch as you're working with your electrophysiologist to determine. Let's go a little bit deeper about the gene testing, because I can tell you firstly, I just want to say my reaction to my sister getting diagnosed was like very scary, because when you think you're so rare and one of one, and your siblings get cleared and your niece gets cleared, you're kind of like, I can deal with myself. I mean, I'm going to have to deal with my own condition. But when you layer that on with, now I'm worried about my siblings, I'm especially worried about my niece, who at the time and still is very, very active.
This is my daughter, who was engaged in competitive swimming at the time.
Yeah. And I had to say it was a source of friction between Meredith and I, because I kept pushing Meredith to go get gene tested. And at the same time, I'm pushing her, Brooke is engaged in competitive swimming. And I went once to watch a practice and I couldn't go back again. I was so fearful that Brooke was going to go into tachycardia or sudden cardiac arrest swimming that I couldn't even attend. I know that, I was pushing and pushing and pushing you to get this done. But eventually you did. So you took on a little bit more because of Brooke, of sleeping a mother, but you also felt an obligation to our larger family group. So I'm just wondering if you want to talk about that.
So, in her background, our paternal grandmother dropped dead at age 40, and the family lore is she'd spent her entire life, could drop dead at any time. Now, families being families, there's lots of conjecture as to why that is, but it certainly sounds like ARVC.
Yeah. So she's our father's mother, who died at 40.
Right. And then, our particular background is that, as Dana Spears says, it's like a Paleolithic layer of Upper Canadians. So long group of people in the same place, and we're related to people, say 7 generations back, but 5 times over. And which obviously is not uncommon in ethnic groups. So one of our cousins, distant, but a cousin nevertheless, when he was 13, he was in a cross-country race and, was out for quite a bit. He was revived, but it was pretty significant. And, if you look back at the family tree, it's an immediate cousin, but it is definitely with within our group. And so there's that. I just want to also go back to the issue of my daughter. So yeah, she was swimming. Heather is right. There was friction, and I think that, sort of me wanting her to play sports is not, I'm not going to make excuses for myself, but I definitely understand it when I talk to other parents. I understand it. Like, sports is a huge part of our family. It's a big part of everybody's. They want to bring their kids up with sports. Again, I'm not trying to make excuses for myself. It ends up that my daughter was cleared to play competitive rugby. She played for Ontario. But she was not. The cardiologists are like, no, she shouldn't row. She shouldn't do triathlons. She shouldn't do endurance running. But she's allowed to play competitive squash, very competitive rugby. And so, and there was a point at which my daughter was actually slightly misdiagnosed to say, oh, you can't do rugby. And then the diagnosis was sort of managed a bit and figured out, and she could go back. But I can tell you, those were not happy days as we waited to watch again, like a young person being told no sports.
Yeah, it's a big issue that families face. We felt it in our own family. Like, I had a lot of concern. You're trying to navigate it, and the guidelines are continuously updating. So,
especially as sports relates to mental health and well-being, particularly for young women, because it's, this is how people manage themselves.
Well, and we know from talking to Dr. Spears is that a lot of families who hear this diagnosis sometimes put the full brakes on, and then there's no activity, there's no exercise, and then obesity becomes an issue. So we have done an early episode with Dr. Bob Hamilton that people can go back and review about the new updated guidelines, and of course they should get guidance. But giving up sports or being told to really be restricted is a huge mental health burden. But you navigate it because because we got good care, and
also I was closing in on 50s when I was diagnosed, and my cardiologist said that the Italians say that you can play golf and make love, which maybe I'm almost like I guess I had to give up intense sessions on the treadmill, which truthfully,
we also joke between us that you should have had this because you would be much better giving up all the things.
I think my sister's overlooking my competitive rugby career where I played.
Rowing.
I was a very mediocre rower. I was a better rugby player, but this issue of sports is a huge one for families.
You encountered some resistance though when you went out to our sort of more distant family to talk about tell this story, because it is kind of, it's illuminating. It's funny too.
Well, they'll probably hear it. So I'm gonna give a modified version. So there is a duty to inform, right? Like not a legal duty, but moral. And I have to say that the cardiologists have really kind of said, you really should tell your family members. Like, you really should. And again, thinking about this cousin of mine, whose sisters I know, I'm like, wow. And especially too, when we see our distant cousins, we all vaguely look alike. And I'm like, oof, you sometimes you're like, we're distant, but it doesn't look distant. And I guess I'd had a glass of wine, and I'm like, out of the blue almost, I'm like, I'm just going to email them. And so there were some cousins that I literally, and we don't know each other that well. I remember one cousins I went over and I sat down. I'm like, okay, here's the deal. Just take or leave it, but I'm just going to lay it out for you. And they're like, oh, and they, between them, I think there must have been 12 kids, maybe even 14, like, of their siblings' kids. And I'm like, so I'll leave it to you. And then one of my cousins wrote back and said, oh, that's terrible. We're very sad that you have this condition, but it's not us. And I do laugh because that sort of level of dismissiveness is kind of sort of a characteristic of my father's family of so I did laugh when I got that. And as it turns out, one of her closer relatives got tested, and daughter, and so sure enough, right? So there is, it's awkward. But at the end of the day, where's the downside? Better to say something and put it out there and say, look, just go get tested.
Yeah.
And have your kids tested. And it's very interesting too, because particularly some of my friends, I actually referred a friend of mine, and he was fainting. And I'm like, okay, there's one thing about a 61-year-old man like fainting. And I'm like, but I know your kids are intensely athletic. They're the ones that you need to go. And on the rugby fields, for instance, I would always ask, where's the defibrillator?
Yeah.
And a lot of times the defibrillator was, like 3 fields away in the public restroom. Like, and they look at me and they're like, oh, it must be for you, the 50-year-old. I'm like, no, it's for the kids.
Yeah.
You don't know out on those fields what could happen if one of those kids goes down.
Absolutely. We know that, defibrillation gives a greater chance of survival from sudden cardiac arrest. And every 100 meters is away reduces a chance of living, or every minute that it's away reduces the chance of living by 10%. So that's an easy calculation to make. What do you think, the long-term effects on your mental health have been, short and long-term, with knowing, this about yourself, about grappling with me? Like, how do you think it's affected you?
Well, in some ways it was relief because, as my cardiologist says, anxiety is symptomatic and causal, and there's not clear which. So in some ways, it kind of is almost relieving to know that, and I don't want to dismiss like the impact or causes of mental health, but it does allow me in a kind of weird way to manage my anxiety. And me, for instance, less self-ruminating about a symptom, which is self-ruminating, right? So you're like, wait a minute, okay, that's anxiety. Well, all right, it could be something else. So and in some ways it's a bit liberating.
It's interesting. I hadn't ever thought of it like for you in that way, that it might be liberating because it gives a cause in a way.
A cause, and also you're like, you also know it's temporal. And also it's biological, right? So again, it gets you out of that self-ruminating loop. I'm anxious. Why am I anxious? So I'm bad for being anxious, right? You're like, oh, this could be something related to my heart. Okay, right? And let it pass.
You changed a couple of things, I think. Like you used to have a jet ski. And bomb around on a jet ski.
Oh my Lord.
And then like lie on the dock.
So I couldn't figure out. So I, treated myself to a jet ski, and I would go to the jet ski and I would come in and I would literally roll off the jet ski exhausted. And I'm like, it's a jet ski. Like, how hard is it? I'm like, no. A jet ski actually, as Dr. Heather Ross reminded me, is actually thousands of pounds of pressure and force. And I was literally exhausting myself. Like I could have run up and down a hill and done less sort of stressed my heart less. So again, what's so interesting, you have to get away from the stereotype of like, oh, there's an overweight person eating too many pork chops and not getting enough exercise. And that's what's going to cause a heart problem. In this case, there's an underlying heart problem that expresses itself in places you wouldn't think.
Yeah, it's a disease of the heart muscle that expresses as an electrical issue. So it's not a plumbing problem. It's not like blocked arteries.
And you do spend a lot of time, by the way, with people. I mean, I've had a weight problem all my life, so everybody's always wants to give overweight women advice. And they're always going to give you advice about your heart. So people are, you know what you need to do? You need to spend more time jogging and doing high intensity interval training. And I'm like, no, I actually
exactly
the opposite thing. And so you have to kind of let that go, I think.
Yeah. I mean, the thing that I encountered, of course, is being such a young person, being in cardiac wards where often, and you have been with me a couple of times where we had to get attention. Do you remember when I went and played basketball? So we did this pickup basketball game, and then I knew I was in tachycardia. Meredith, you had to drive me down to St. Mike's. They put me in a room and closed the curtain. And I literally threw the water jug across the wall, like hit the with the last bit of my strength to some of them. And they came in and they're like, "What are you doing?" And then they saw me and then attended to me, because there's such a bias in emergency rooms. I mean, they look for the older, probably the older guy having a heart attack, not the young person who came in basketball shoes. But getting just back to the burden of the disease, like I honestly think there's the mental burden of this disease is significant. Living with, being aware of your own mortality at a young age, having a lot of restrictions. I mean, a whole episode and being told not at the time, and now they can do they can manage high risk pregnancies and people with our condition, but at the time they couldn't for women.
Yeah, I mean, I could joke about it. I mean, for me, I like being engaged in the world, and so often throughout my life I've been involved in many causes. Right, I'm an activist by nature, and I'm a lawyer. And so what I have to be careful about, back to vocation, things that you want to be engaged in is, I'll get engaged in a community group, I'll get engaged in a political cause, and then suddenly, it's too much.
I'm always telling you to back off.
And then suddenly I am like, wow, my heart is racing. I'm like fatigued. It is. And, I'm in something where, I don't want to be false. To me, it's important what's going on. And there's a lot of the things I get involved in. There'll be high intensity, lots of emails, there's a press release going out, there's something happening, and you've got to be there. And then suddenly I'm on my back, overwhelmed, and I can't participate. I have to say, guys,
I've had to do that too.
I'm out. And you might be out of the game when it's really important, but you're like, I got to get out.
Yeah. Well, let's just wrap up with some final last thoughts. This has been a good conversation. I hope people are going to take away some positives from this. I mean, I can say that being aware that I have this condition has made me much more mindful of how I live my life. I think I've tried to make good choices. I think I have a lot more empathy for people with their own health conditions and struggles. And this has also given me a life purpose to help others, to be an advocate, to be a donor. I really hope in our lifetime that there is a gene therapy that will stop the expression of this disease. They think this family of diseases is actually much more common. It's just been very much underdiagnosed. It's not rare. It's just underdiagnosed. But I hope, my mission would be to assist in any way till we get to that spot. Is there any silver linings to this for you? I mean, as some last thoughts, is there anything that you really take away?
Well, it's funny because I think coming right now, so my daughter's 22. She's almost the same age that Heather was. And so I really, going back to where we started, which was watching, sitting and watching my 21-year-old sister, I've really come through it almost through the lens of it as a parent. And I think that I think there's lots of obviously silver linings. We're here, lucky us.
Yeah.
And I don't want to diminish. In fact, I want to emphasize the alternative and know that that's kind of what we're up against, right? That people who are undiagnosed, children, young people, we know that this expresses in stress, right? In sports, childbirth. So, I think that awareness and doing what we're doing is a silver lining if it reaches people, and realize, there's stuff to look for, there's things you can do, there's things your family can do, and sort of move forward together, because, the brutality and the suddenness of this, a sudden cardiac death, or in the case of my sister, where so many parts of her life were cut off early, it's pretty awful.
Yeah.
Sorry, you went in on a happy note. Here
we're together.
We're doing this, and and you're out there listening, and things are moving along in research.
I think so. Yeah. Well, thank you. Thanks for coming over.
Great. Well, thank you for having me.
Opening this up, and
thank you for the platform for SADS for doing this.
Yeah.
It's great. It's really helpful. And lucky us that there's a podcast that can be broadcasted.